Okay, I think we can start. People will join. It's already past 10 o'clock. So if that's okay with everyone, we're ready to go, and welcome everyone who is joining us this morning on behalf of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce and our partner for this particular webinar, which is Veolia. So the topic today is future work, ensuring good occupational health and safety. It's part of a series of webinars that we have been running since actually the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in March. I think we've already run about 30 webinars and virtual meetings, and we really hope you're all following these and following the activities of the Chamber. Just before we start, I'd like to let you know that after the presentations we'll be having a Q&A, and you're very welcome to put forward any questions you may have using the Q&A button that you will see at the bottom of your screen. Today's moderator is Aine Murray, and Aine is Head of Marketing, Communications, Corporate Responsibility and Bid Support at Veolia Ireland and Northern Ireland. Aine has a demonstrated history of working in the environmental services industry. She is also a director on the Council of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce, and we are delighted that she has been involved with us for several years and is also a member of our executive team. So Aine, I'd like to thank you for being the contact to get this very important webinar off the ground, and I'd like to pass it over to you, and if we could then if you could introduce the speakers, etc.
Of course. Thank you, Cleona, and thank you for inviting me to facilitate today's session. Coming from a marketing communications background, I tend to be heavily involved with our teams and ensuring that they are connected to the organisation, living our company values and identity. And I can attest to the fact that good occupational health and safety is fundamental to every company's performance, because when colleagues and teams feel equipped to behave safely and look out for their and each other's health and well-being, that's when they are really in the best place to let their talents shine through. So I'm delighted that we're addressing this topic of future working and ensuring good occupational health and safety today. This is particularly even more significant in the context of the coronavirus pandemic, which has seen many new workplaces spring up overnight and then have to be sustained over time. But without further ado, allow me to first of all introduce our panel of speakers, and then I will just briefly outline the format we will be following today before getting down to the topic at hand. So I'm delighted to welcome Tom Beegan, the former CEO of the Health and Safety Authority. They're the national statutory body with responsibility for ensuring that workers and those affected by work are protected from work-related injury and ill health. Andre Hickey, Country Head of Quality, Health, Safety and the Environment at Veolia. Veolia, the environmental services company, specialising in waste, water and energy management for large campuses and manufacturing plants. Bairbre, Head of Human Resources at Crédit Agricole Creditor Insurance, and that's the Crédit Agricole Assurances group subsidiary specialising in creditor protection insurance and offering a comprehensive range of products designed to meet financial protection needs of its customers and partners. And Deirdre Cronnelly, CEO and founder of AFRESH. And AFRESH are a motivational well-being company who act as a catalyst in assisting individuals and groups to achieve positive and fulfilling results in both their personal and professional lives. So we'll be aiming to keep the format fairly interactive, beginning with a short presentation from Andre and Tom on future work and the challenges employers are likely to face in the future from that health and safety perspective. And we will then follow that short talk by opening the discussion out to the wider panel. Now, we do encourage you to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and you can ask questions by clicking into the Q&A tab, which you should see at the bottom of your screens there if you just move your mouse around. Now, this is a very interesting and it's a very wide-reaching topic which we're exploring today, but we will be strict on timekeeping, closing in time for 11 o'clock in just over 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask the panel to please not take offence if I have to hurry anyone along at any stage. But now I am delighted to hand over to Andre and Tom to take us through the first part of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Aine. Hi everybody, thanks very much for the invitation today from myself, and also I'd like to thank Tom Beegan for joining us today. He has kindly put his time aside for us today, so thanks very much, Tom. So 6 points we want to look at today. So the content for today's discussion is the 5 cultures of safety, the priority versus value, compliance versus risk versus culture, the golden circle. Tom's going to discuss about habit, and then we'll look at the virtual safety advisor and manager as well. So when we look at safety, there's 5 areas of culture that we look at. The first level on the lower side there is the pathological side. And again, it's probably self-explanatory. You know, we care as long as we're not caught, basically. It's still operational within industry today, which is quite sad to see. But again, it is what it is, and some companies just don't have resources to look at that side of safety. So they do what they can when they can. The next level would be the reactive stage. So safety is important. We look at safety every time we have an accident. Again, it's a reactive sort of culture, very probably prevalent in around construction industry and moving up into the calculative stage. But again, it is part of a journey for our organizations to take. We move then into the calculative stage where we have systems in place and we manage all of our hazards. So this is where you would see the likes of ISO standards sitting from a compliance perspective. And most organizations look and operate in around this area. There's very few organizations that operate in the next 2 stages, which is the proactive stage, is where leadership is really involved in the continuous improvement and push of safety. And then when you look at the top level, the generative stage, that's very much geared towards the pharmaceutical end of industry. But there's very few organizations that operate in the top 2 tiers there of the 5 levels of safety culture. Most organizations do operate in around the calculative stage. And unfortunately, we do have organizations still in the latter, the first 2 stages of culture. So when we look at priority versus value, you normally see within industries that an awful lot of leadership, and again, an awful lot of campaigns are driven by safety as being a priority, you know. So when we look at the number 1 there, safety is a number 1 priority. Number 2, the number 1 priority for an organization is safety. And safety first is our priority. And number 4 is safety is our top priority. And regardless of what part of business or industry you operate in, you'll always hear that word priority. Now, opinion is that it's totally wrong. You know, safety cannot be a priority, and the reason why it can't be a priority is because priorities are political and your priorities change. If you really want to have the leadership driven and the culture, this word culture that we talk about, it really is that safety needs to be a value, and the only way you can get a value is when you start to build trust within an organization. So I would encourage everybody, please, if you have the word priority anywhere along your business line from a health and safety and environmental perspective, please take it out. So when we look at compliance versus risk versus culture, an awful lot of companies are very much driven by ISO standards, which is the compliance side of the business. It does cater for a certain level of risk, but one thing that it probably doesn't drive is the level of culture. And the one thing about culture, it can be very difficult to pin down within an organization. So when you look at what is culture, well, culture is basically, that's how you do work around here. And when you look at the 5 levels of safety, that's where you go into that generative stage of safety. So it's just normal day to day. It's very hard to get to that level of culture within an organization. We now look at industry that an awful lot of companies are moving away from ISO standards, and they're very much aligning themselves with the standards. So the one thing about ISO standards is that it doesn't really cater for the risk and culture side of the business. And again, we must be very mindful of that. The one thing we do want to see within industry is that you get a happy balance. So you have process and procedures there, but also that you take in that people factor. And it's that people factor that you really need to build a culture. So when we look at the golden circle, this is probably, if some people are very familiar with Simon Sinek, this is a methodology that he promotes. Now this was around way before Simon Sinek, and Tom will touch on it later on in relation to habit. You know, it's been around since the 70s, but Simon Sinek has probably modeled it in his own way. So when we look at the golden circles. Most organizations operate within the first two circles, which is the what and the how, and very few absolutely operate within the why. An awful lot of inward-looking companies operate within the what and the how, versus the outward-looking companies, the likes of Apple, the likes of Coca-Cola, the likes of Siemens. They all operate from a centralized position outwards, so they know what they're doing. They know what their why is within an organization. So when you look at the why, what is your why? Your why is the purpose. What is your cause? What is your belief? The how is the process. So that's where we're talking about standards from a compliance perspective. And then the what is the results that come out from the back end of that process. The interesting factor about this is that when you map it against the brain, it maps perfectly. So when you look at the limbic side of the brain, this is where we talk about culture and what is culture. Culture is when you get that gut feeling, and that's where the limbic part of the brain operates. So if people look at organizations, the whole thing about trust, suddenly the limbic part of the brain activates, and that's where you get that gut feeling, the loyalty. So until you get people to operate within that whole area of occupational health and safety, you'll never really get a culture within an organization. Because when you look at the other side of the brain, the neocortex, that's where you get all your reasonable, analytical thinking, and that's where you divulge your language. But it's the limbic part of the brain that you need to really activate, and that's where you get that light bulb moment. And the only way you can get that is when you look at organizations where people really, really trust leadership, that you do care, and it's the whole thing about care. And when you care about people, that's where you get that activation of gut feeling within an organization. Tom, over to you from a habit perspective.
Thank you very much, Andre. So I come at this from, as you can see from the color of my hair, many years of trials and tribulations, and have an experience of being the enforcer, as Aine referred to in my early career, to being a preventer when I was in Canada for a number of years, and now I operate as a consultant. So I bring that, and for me, I'm going to be rather provocative now in some of my comments I'm going to make. What got me thinking about this was the fact that in organizations I'd been in, people believed that once they had their policies, procedures, protocols, guidelines written in a nice lever arch file that never saw the light of day in terms of a worker after they were done, that was it. And they were lured into a false sense of security, sometimes by my own profession, to say what you need is a safety statement, and what you need is a policy for this, and a risk assessment for that, and a method statement for this, and a toolbox talk for that, and on and on and on and on and on it went. For me, we're moving to a stage in the evolution of the management of occupational health and safety where, unless it is within the prowess and the competence of the individual worker or employee at whatever status they hold, and they can do it for themselves, then we've failed. We have got to get to a point of understanding the why, the how, that Andre talked about. Why do we do this? And I think in the current climate of the COVID, it's probably worth just focusing for a minute or two on that. We had prided ourselves with a very sophisticated risk management system across all sectors of the economy, whether that's public sector, private sector, you name it. We didn't pick it up. And when it came, as any risk comes, our mitigation management and systems fell way short. And it fell way short because we didn't understand, and we hadn't made it the way we do things, how we actually manage risk. Yes, we had the academic and the cerebral discussions around risk, and we rated it, and we did it as part of any new project, any new launch, any new plan, any strategic plan. We had all that, but it was just that. It was just stuff we did, and then we went back to do what we always did before. So the thing we have to understand at this point is there's a gap between work as we believe it to be done and work as it is actually done. And our space is to make that gap non-existent. Because any incident we've seen, any outbreak of the COVID, if we take the COVID as a risk, the mechanisms required to protect the people failed because of our behavior. Wasn't the science. We knew the risk. We knew how serious it was, but we got it because the defense mechanism broke and someone in the chain, and you know, the R and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do a George Lee on it, but we know when one breaks what happens. So why is it then, knowing what we know, that we don't have that gap closed? And it goes back to our behavior, and to go back to what Andre was saying, what drives our behavior? I like to start with our values. And in this time of reflection, when we're looking at, well, maybe what's this all about? Why didn't I think of a little bit more flexibility in the workforce? It wasn't that we didn't talk enough about it in the past, but because we were forced into it, we did a pivot and we're agile enough to take that on board, and we did it. So for me, and that's why, as Andre will talk about later, we're moving in our thought process to this idea that if we do give the skills and then everyone knows how to do it, and in law, the management of occupational health and safety of your employees or members of the public is a line management responsibility, then adding more and more resources to the health and safety function is a sign that you need to pause and rethink. Because policies on their own will not keep you safe. Documents on their own never kept you safe. It's down to our behavior. So the first thing is to have commitment to key values and key outcomes. And commitment, what is commitment? Commitment is something you think about. It's something you weigh up. And when you're in, you're in. You're not in when the going is good and then it gets tough, you opt out. You try to make it work. So it's a difference, and it's a piece about the values, not the priority that Andre was talking about. So that's the first thing. What's our commitment? What are we committed to? If we say our staff are our best resource, then prove it. Are you treating them the same way as you treat your profit and loss? Are you treating the same as your investment account? Prove it. Align accountabilities. Another thing, when I go into a lot of organizations, whether it's dealing with psychosocial hazards, which I'll come to in a second, or not, one of the first things I find in 98% or 99% of the cases is there's confusion about roles, responsibility, and reporting relationships. The 3 R's. So align accountabilities, align them with your commitment. Because it's okay to say, well, we've signed off the strategy, but I can tell you in a little bit about, and you probably know this yourselves, in terms of culture, there is no one culture in an organization. There are multiple cultures. And the cultures in the warehouse are different to the culture in finance or marketing. But we have an overall push, a general thrust, but there are many cultural and microcultures. So align them, they can be the role model. So this really speaks to the point of, I've signed off the plan. We have done this. This is what we're going to do. We're going to reverse car park. We're not going to break the rules. And yet when you're on your way home, you answer the phone in the car. You break the red light. You get out in the morning, your windscreen is frosty. You don't wait for it to be mist, you go. Why? Well, I've always done it that way. Well, no. If you're going to, staff pick up what you do more than what you say. And then the insistent continuous improvement piece is all about, well, what are you measuring anyway? And I know some of the questions are about productivity in the remote working. Well, my question to you, how did you measure the performance when they were in the office? Was it that you saw them standing at the water cooler? Was it that you met them down at the canteen? Like, was it that you saw them in at 6 o'clock in the evening, or they were there when you came in the morning? Like, what was the measure? And we've got to evolve that. And the final piece is the team. We have to get people lined up in a team. And like any good team, we have feedback. Training on its own is useless, in my opinion, without feedback. Training that don't get you to teach and talk and do is useless. Training that goes on for 3 and 4 hours in a day and 2 days at a time is a waste of time. If you can't get what you want across in the first 2 hours, you should rethink what you're at. So the habit then speaks to the behavior. People, good things happen or bad things happen because of what we do. And we should look at the context of why, and when incidents happen, for example, I've been in one recently where a guy who was in the warehouse had a bad incident, and he broke his leg, unfortunately. But anyway, when we went into that, the company had done it and blamed him for not watching out for where he was and tripping over the piece of wood that was a skid under a pallet. But that shouldn't have been there according to the policy, shouldn't have been parked there. He didn't know it was there. He was concentrating on something else. It was there for many times. It had never been changed. And in my opinion, I blame line management for that, because they were not living up to their own policies and procedures. So the idea that we must align ourselves, we must integrate, and there's nothing new in this, my friends. Kaplan and Norton back in the day, when they came up with the balanced scorecard, that's what they were trying to achieve. And we, in this business of managing occupational health, in this time of risk that we're finding so difficult to wrestle to the ground and to deal with, have got to have an integrated approach. People know how to protect themselves, and we look out for each other and we show that we care. Without that, you can have as many systems as you like, you can have as many policies as you like, and as many safety weeks or safety days. It won't cut it in the long term until you deal with that and make it a habit.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. So when we look at the way industry is going, and we're seeing this across industry, is that we're talking now about a virtual safety advisor manager. And a lot of companies are using this too from a technology perspective, but you also must be mindful of an awful lot of these things would be that it has to be affordable. One is that you can tap into expertise. You get changes in legislation where you can get the advice from the virtual safety advisor or manager. Again, it drives culture programs and technology. It aligns with systems. It gives you a balanced approach. And again, when you're doing any type of system from this perspective, it must be user friendly. There's an awful lot of systems in the marketplace that are very cumbersome. And again, the whole thing we go back to what Tom even touched on there would be culture. What is culture? You have to identify that within your own organization, really. When we're looking at risks that organizations don't manage very well, three that I've highlighted here would be driving for work, mental health well-being. I know that Deirdre is going to talk about that in a while, and communication. And the top one I really want to touch on would be driving for work. Roughly about 1.4 million people are killed every single year globally. And of that number, about 33% of those are in an occupational environment. So they're driving for work. So that's huge. So when you break that down, there's roughly about one person killed every 20 to 25 seconds somewhere in the world. So we don't manage that area very well, to be honest. Mental health, again, Deirdre's going to talk on that. But when we come all around to what Tom touched on, your process, your procedures, everything, it really comes down to communication. Clear communication from people. If people on the ground don't know what they're doing, well, then you're going to have incidents. If supervisors don't know how to manage that, you're going to have incidents. And if leadership don't show that communication skill, you're going to have incidents. That's just our details. We'll send it out in the presentation. If anybody needs to contact us, please do. For any advice, no problem whatsoever. And we'll hand it back to you, Anya.
Great. Thank you, Andre and Tom. That was an extremely interesting and thought-provoking presentation, and I took plenty of notes, and I will be encouraging, if anybody has any questions, do feel free to include them in the Q&A chat, in the Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen as well. But there's certainly a lot to think about for organisations, and looking now where we are now and as we look to the future as well for work. But I'd like to take this opportunity now to bring maybe Deirdre and Bairbre into the conversation, and start maybe with yourself, Deirdre. Because one thing that struck me as I listened to Tom and Andre was that we now obviously have this new environment where employees are working from the office, or they're working from homes, or in some combination of the two, and that changes over time, and it's likely to continue as well into the future. So is there a need for us to provide, as organisational leaders, occupational health and safety supports and ergonomics in both locations, or what should the approach be?
Yeah, there's actually a legislative need to provide ergonomics for wherever the employee is working from. So if they are working remotely from home, there is a legislative need to do that, as well as in the office. But, you know, just keeping in line with Tom's tone of his presentation, legislation, policies, all the rest, it's not always necessarily about that. Of course, we have to respect it. But even if the legislation wasn't there, it makes sense to make sure that our employees are set up so that they can work in a comfortable and safe way. that will have a direct impact on your motivation and your productivity. And I think anybody, without going into the statistics of it, but any of us who've ever had back pain or wrist pain or shoulder pain, we know how difficult it is to do a decent day's work. You know, we all know it. And so there's the hardcore kind of, well, it's going to affect my productivity, which in turn is going to affect my profitability. And whether that's sitting at my desk or whether it is in the warehouse. And then, God forbid, if I do develop an injury because of bad ergonomics, posture, whatever, that then is going to have a direct impact on my mental health. And there's a direct correlation between how people suffer when they incur physical disabilities or physical ailments and how it impacts their mental health. And Lord knows, in this day and age, we do know that physical, mental, emotional health, well-being, they are all interconnected. So as employers, it makes sense for us, even whether or not there was legislation in place, to provide that service. And the HSE, they're not coming down heavy and, you know, fast on employers to do it, but they have recommended a very practical two-phased approach, which would be happy to take any of our clients through if they want. And it's really about identifying those employees who first and foremost have a need and who might be at risk. And there's very simple ways to do that. And then if employers are under pressure, budget-wise, time-wise, there's lots of free resource that can be sent out immediately to the employees on the HSE website. And indeed, we have free podcasts and intranet updates. If any of the chamber members would like them, we'd be more than happy to provide it. So yes, there is a need. And even if there wasn't a legislative need, it makes good business sense to look after the physical well-being of our employees.
When you talk about it, it's amazing how much actually is linked to or can spiral away if you're not developing good ergonomics and good posture. Yeah. And you mentioned there particularly how the influence it has on motivation and productivity. Do you have any tips on maintaining motivation and productivity for our teams now that they're working from home? I have heard of companies doing it by monitoring screen time, for example, which I'm not sure might be the best way to do it.
It's interesting. As Andre said, there's some great technology out there, but it's not always that effective. And if you're going to be monitoring employees via login time and screen time, that will guarantee presenteeism in front of the screen, but not necessarily productivity. And those of us in the virtual office, or those of us in the traditional offices, know that presenteeism costs Ireland, I think it's 1.1 billion. There was a survey done by IBEC back in 2011. So physical presenteeism is a big problem. Virtual presenteeism, if we're not careful in terms of how we manage our employees, is going to be an even bigger problem, which will in turn affect productivity. Now, Tom made a very good point on his slide, on the habit slide, which I guess is directly related to it. It's how do we as managers manage the employees, and rather than focus on traditional metrics, maybe we want to be focusing on the outcome. And then that ties back into, I think, what Andre was saying in terms of the purpose and the trust of your organization. It's really about trust, empowering and engaging. And I guess it ties into what I think was Goethe said, you know, in this life, if there's one thing we need to do, it's know thyself. And I would extend that out to say, know thyself and know thy team that you have working with your employees. And if you know how you work and how they work, then remote working policies can be put in place to ensure that the outcomes that are required are achieved, as opposed to measuring via traditional metrics. So whilst all companies will have certain policies that we need to recognize, I know that, well, I'm going to have to work early in the morning and I will have to do a certain amount of screen time. But if my manager trusts me to deliver the outcome that's required from a company perspective, I will do that in my own time without necessarily having to put in 6 hours a day logged into my screen every single day. So it goes down to tête-à-tête, I think, you know, if we're in the French chamber today. And tête-à-tête being talk, empower and trust. And then take it away. And the second tête-à-tête I talk about with my clients is talk, empower and thank. So it's about having the conversation to build the trust and build the culture. So tête-à-tête, very simply, talk, empower, trust, talk, empower, thank, and take the feedback on board. So it's all a new way of working, and I think we're all learning, but that certainly is more effective to get the desired outcomes than manage login screen time.
And actually, it's very interesting. I really like that tete-a-tete. Bairbre, I'd actually like to bring you in here because we're talking last year about motivation and engaging, particularly now in this new pandemic context. How has that worked for your organisation? How have you kept your teams motivated and engaged?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, everything that my panel colleagues are saying really resonates, actually. And I really like the tete-a-tete as well. And I think the earlier discussions around leading by example, around increasing trust and accountability, values, and what Tom was saying about sort of policies on their own, policies that maybe sit in a drawer not meaning anything. So I'm delighted really to talk a little bit here, I suppose, about our experience in CASI and how we've kept our teams motivated and engaged through this pandemic. And I suppose the impact of change in 2020 and then our plans for the next sort of 12 months. So I suppose a bit about me as head of HR. I have been working very closely with our managing director, Mary Ryan, and with our senior management team, and our leadership team. And it's really important to have all of those teams engaged and working really closely together at any point in time, but particularly I think this year. So in CASI, as Cleona mentioned at the beginning, we have a very diverse workforce. So we actually have 22 different nationalities within our office in Dublin when we're in the office, and we also have a branch in Paris and a branch in Milan. So I suppose like everybody else at the beginning of the year, well, around March, January in fact, we were sort of closely following the experience and the happenings around COVID in China and in Milan. And I suppose in anticipation of what we thought was going to happen and the potential spread of the virus and the risks, we started detailed planning with our crisis management committee and with our health and safety committee in the office. And obviously that planning was paramount in terms of the well-being of our staff and in terms of people being ready to be able to leave the office and work from home. So when the announcement came around the 12th of March, our planning was complete, which was great to have that proactively done. And that was thanks to the work of our crisis management teams, of our health and safety team, and again of our managers and leaders. And we met with our staff on that day, a day that'll be memorable, I think, for maybe lots of reasons. So we met on that day and we presented to them on the work that we'd done and the plans that we'd made. And a key aspect of everything for us always, but particularly since then, has been our communications with people, real communication. So we were very conscious of making sure that we communicated and continued to communicate during this period. So we've probably amped up communications even further. And we've been really very clear, and I think it's really very important to be very clear from the top down, right from the CEO down, from the managing director, in terms of we were giving staff regular updates from the authorities, updates on business impacts, health and safety communications regularly, well-being communications. And for us, knowing that the profile of our staff isn't necessarily native English speakers, we were always mindful of the fact that our communication and our information and our planning needs to be really clear and structured. I think what was important for us in terms of keeping teams motivated as well was keeping connected to our employees. So keeping connected to their feelings, to their concerns. So engagement levels for us were really important. So obviously we did things like pulse surveys throughout this pandemic. And, you know, we asked our employees very real questions, and they gave us obviously feedback, anonymous feedback, which we've used in conjunction with lots of other channels of feedback to help our employees. So we wanted to understand what's their experience of this crisis and how they were managing getting used to working in a completely different way. I mean, a completely different way. Even our contact teams, our customer service teams, were suddenly bringing the customer into their own homes, you know? So, I mean, that's quite something for people to do that and to take that on board. And I suppose our raison d'etre as a group is working every day in the interests of our customer and society, and we really live that, and we've continued to do that and to communicate that during the pandemic. Our managers have been critical in this process, and all of our managers have been involved in the process. So what we've done is we, as a senior management team, for example, initially during this period. We met every single day at 12 o'clock. And we met to discuss how business was going in our own areas, but really as well to discuss, very importantly, how are the teams doing? How are the managers doing? How are the team leaders doing? How are all of the staff doing? We had regular meetings then with our management team, again with the same agenda, to check in, to ask them how are things, how were people feeling, what were they experiencing, how were they managing, were there any tools that they needed, you know, were we doing enough, did we need to do more to assist them? I suppose what was key for us is we decided we were going to continue to do everything we had done while we were in the office virtually. So we recruited 26 people during the from March this year and inducted them from all around the world. We've continued our induction programs. We've continued focus groups. We've held virtual lunches facilitated by our heads of department together with our managers and groups of invited staff. Corporate social responsibility is really important to us, and that's important in terms of our staff motivation as well. So I suppose giving back to society is really important. And for example, we have Alone as our charity of the year, voted by our staff. So we had coffee mornings. We sent a coffee delivery with some scones and things out to staff, and then all connected in virtual chat rooms to have coffee and raise money for Alone. We had marathons, we had walks, that sort of thing. And I suppose just to say and to pick up on the mental and physical well-being, and I'll stop talking in a minute and let you get somebody else in, but the whole physical and mental well-being has also been of paramount importance to us. So we have a culture and values team at Cassie, and we've always had a program of well-being activities, but we were very conscious of the fact that during this period of time, it was particularly important to put a further focus on mental health and well-being. So we did initiate a program around mental health and well-being, which included putting in place, for example, partnering with AFRESH and partnering with Leia to put in place things like yoga, Pilates, meditation, body balance classes, all online and virtually. And we developed a program of well-being tips for mental health, which we delivered to staff every single day for a period of time. And we're continuing to do that and to check in with people. So lots more to say, but I might take a breath there and give you a chance
to really see the culture shining through, and really how culture and that kind of sense of well-being connects to occupational health and safety. And just, I might actually bring Tom back in here if I may, because you spoke about trust and culture during your presentation. How can you actually create those environments, and how can you do that in a sustainable way?
Thanks, Anya. I think there's a number of things. I think the first thing is maybe just to think about, as Barbara was talking there, you know, about the number of people that you recruit and how you recruit them and how you onboard them, for starters. Because I find a lot of the time that, and in fact, my focus is going to go more into the what I call the psychosocial hazards, away from the traditional ones. I think the traditional ones are very well covered in terms of it's not a shortage of information. But I find that on the psychosocial side of things, when I talk about them, I'm talking about stress, harassment, bullying, deteriorating mental health, workplace conflict. That sphere of risk and hazard is very poorly managed. So that's where the whole onboarding of a person, but more importantly about going back to some basics. I think sometimes we overcomplicate this. Do I know, as I said in my presentation, what my role and my responsibility, who I'll be reporting to, and what expected results there are? Are those clear? What is the system then by which we proactively deal with that? I mean, I've seen umples of examples where the reactive side of things comes to the fore when someone perceived isn't working well, or we get a complaint from a customer or something like that happens, and then we deal with the problem. Okay, so for me, it's about the management style that's inclusive, that the clarity is there, that everybody, one of the speakers have mentioned, and that our behavior matches our words throughout the system. That's really where you have to go. Now, one of the things that I just made, people coming back to work, you know, who may have been out on stress leave or something like that, putting them back into a similar situation with the same line management structure without any support for the line manager or indeed the person returning is a recipe for disaster and usually ends in tears. So we have to get our heads around how we do that. So in short, Anya, I'm thinking about, don't make it overcomplicated. It's about, is there clarity about expectations? Is there supports, genuine supports? And do your behaviors match what you claim to be the supports?
Very good. Yeah, very true. And I just, keeping on that theme of culture, I know, Andre, you spoke about the 5 levels of culture during the presentation, and you mentioned that there are very few at the very top, but where then do most organizations sit? And would you find trends between industries, for example?
Yeah, you would find trends within industries. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of organisations that are still in the pathological side of it, you know, and that's down to bad management, really. It's down to probably companies and organisations being institutionalised to a certain degree. But most organisations operate in the 3rd level, which is the calculative stage. Very few operate in the top 2. You're really talking about the likes of the Intels, the pharma industry, and if you want to go away and have a look outside of this webinar, you know, there's plenty of good information there on really what is culture, you know, and it's no longer about paper or process, it's about people. You know, it's all about people, you know.
Sorry.
Yeah,
so no, I'll continue. Just finish out the
you know, it just from just touching on, you know, what we've all probably looked at and touched on. It's about trust. It's about that limbic part of the brain getting that light bulb moment. It's about that trust factor, people feeling that they are valued, you know, and these words keep on coming up, and really we have to move away from the whole process of paper, you know, statement, risk assessment, process, procedure. It's not about that. It's about sitting down and talking to people.
Very interesting, actually, just that you're saying that, because one of the things, like we actually launched a leadership and management development program for all our team leaders and managers during 2018 and 2019. And that actually has proven to be really important for us, because what's been really interesting, and it links to what you're saying there, and I really believe it to be true, is that for our managers and team leaders, this actually has been a time for them, and we've encouraged them to do this, but it's been a time that they've had to be maybe a little bit more hands-off when it comes to scheduling and planning, but a lot more hands-on in terms of figuring out how people are doing on a day-to-day basis, you know. So they've really had to trust, they've had to take the opportunity to step back a little bit, and really to understand more about their employees, their values, their interests, their motivations, their concerns, their challenges in terms of being at home, maybe with children, trying to do homeschooling, maybe being in a house where a number of other people are working remotely as well. So yeah, the flexibility and trust, really critical, and the person, caring about the person.
Yeah, and there's, you know, regardless of what industry we look at or what individual we look at, there's one common trend, is that we're all human.
Yeah.
And that's really where we need to get back to. We need to get back to people.
Yeah.
It's all about people.
And on that thought of people and that sense of trust, kind of nearly conversely, something else I've seen emerging during the pandemic is employees trying to show they're worthy of that trust and nearly working all hours to show their manager that, yes, I am worthy of trust. And then having that challenge between keeping home and work life separate. And that's obviously going to have risks for occupational health and safety too. So Deirdre, maybe from your side of things, might you have any suggestions on how you might be able to, either employees or line managers, manage that divide between work and home life and that switching off piece?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. The NUI Galway, they did a survey on remote working in, I think, just around the summer, and it was the biggest challenge remote workers had, switching off. And I suppose I call it the 3 Bs: the balance, the blend, the bleed. Because if you don't get the balance right with blending your work and your home life, it's going to bleed, and it bleeds, you want it to bleed in the right way. So it really comes back down to, I guess, the tete-a-tete, the managers understanding and giving their employees a sense of, I suppose, to trust the empowerment and letting them know it's okay to work whatever way works for you once we're getting the outcomes. And some of the tools that we see different managers using are to suggest employees, look, as Charles Darwin, when he was writing Origin of the Species, he had great rituals in place. And this goes back so many years, so it's not new science or anything, it's common sense. Rituals, really, really important to have a clear divide between the start of your workday and the end of your workday. So Our commute to work used to be that divide for many of us. Nowadays, that divide for some of us might be getting up and not staying in the pajamas, but getting up into the shower, putting on the makeup, doing the hair, whatever you guys do. And that's the start of the workday. For others of us, it might mean, look, I'm walking into a different room. Some of us may not have that luxury, so we might be on the kitchen table still. And how do I divide us? Well, simple things like maybe put a tablecloth on, you know, change the color of something in the room. So that'll be the start of the workday, and then to clearly mark the end of the workday. So once that laptop is out of sight, it's out of mind. So really important practical things. If you're using the same phone socially and professionally, turn off those email notifications. Don't be tempted to log in late. However, on the other hand, you might be one of those people who are doing business with the States or with India. So you need to turn in late and you need to have those things on. But if you do know that and know how to blend the work time and the downtime, because what a lot of employees don't understand is in order to switch on, they need to switch off. And this is where the science comes in behind it. It all has to do with our ultradian cycles. And we can work well for 90 to 120 minutes. And then our concentration wanes. So if we don't physically switch off, it's like changing a TV channel. It means we can never switch back on to full-scale productivity. So it's empowering your employees to say, you know what, okay, if you have to take your 90 minutes off now, go take it off, but take it off properly. Don't be, you know, trying to do this whilst picking up the kids, or go and take your break, go and take your coffee, go and take your lunch, but switch it off properly so that when you come back on, you will be able to switch on. So it's really simple, practical stuff on you. It's going back to, yes, to switch on, you need to switch off. So learn how to get the balance, learn how to blend it all so that we don't bleed and we get the outcome that we all want.
Very good. I actually, as you're talking, I recognise some moving rituals that I've brought in myself to mark the start of the day and the end of the day, and I didn't actually realise that that's what they were. there you go.
Yeah.
I see that we're kind of coming to the end of our time together now, and we've covered a wide variety of things, but key things that have come out for me is this balance between values and trust on one side, with ensuring compliance and cultivating that culture of compliance with a culture of trust and risk on the other side. So maybe as one parting thought, I'd like to ask each of our panelists for your 30-second takeaway thought for our webinar participants today. What is the one recommendation or takeaway thought that you would have for the company leaders around this session to ensure that they can contribute positively to their occupational health and safety for their teams? I'll let you all jump in, whoever wants to go first with the 30 seconds.
Well, just for me, on the 30 seconds, I think it's an old cliche, keep it simple, but definitely focus on the human aspects. Make sure your behavior matches your words. And a final sort of tagline, if you like, nobody should be afraid to go to work.
Yeah, I think learning from experience obviously is important, and this comes from reflection. So I would say, you know, connect with your staff, keep connecting with your staff, and make sure that you're having discussions with them about what everybody's learned from this time. So we've all had to test different routines and the way we've worked. And I think I would want to hear, and I would recommend that you want to hear what worked, what didn't work, and keep evolving best practices in terms of that. So for example, one of the things we heard from our employees, quite specific, I suppose, to our group of employees, was many of them were missing their families because they may not be native in Ireland. And so from listening to our employees, we were able to do some work on implementing a remote working from abroad policy, for example. Now, obviously we had to take legal advice, et cetera, on that. But that's one of the things that we were able to do around motivation. And we intend to build that in the future in our smart working plan. So I suppose that's from listening to people, really listening. And it's also from trusting people, which has been something that has come up time and time again, and then living your values and walking the talk.
Yeah, I guess just to build on that, Bairbre, it's the listening and to not to be afraid to engage in those tricky conversations who, you know, in the past, we never had to bring people into our home. in the past, our managers used to tick boxes to a certain extent, and we never had these type of difficult conversations. So again, it's talking, it's empowering, it's trusting, listening to what they have to say, talk, empowering, and thanking. So the tete-a-tete, and give them the tools they need to get the outcomes, but that means let them balance, let them blend, and let them bleed whatever needs to be done. So tete-a-tete really would be my takeaway from us.
Probably from my perspective, again, regardless of what type of industry we look at, it's critical as communication. Absolutely critical. Getting back to basics, like what we're all talking about, the trust factor. We're really probably in the current environment that we're in, we must be mindful as well that people need reassurance. People need reassurance about their jobs. And it's to have that open and honest conversation, get away from having that formal approach and get back to the basics that people are human. So it comes back to everything. Comes back to communication for me.
Very good. There's definitely a lot of very good and useful food for thought there. That's bringing us to the end of our time together. I'd like to thank each of the panel members, Bairbre, Deirdre, Tom and Andre, for your contributions to today's discussions. I think it is safe to say we could have talked for a number of hours on this topic. Now I see there's just a question that came in there towards the end, but what we'll do is we'll work with the panel to respond to that and then issue that out of the slides when they come out afterwards. But I will hand back now to Cleona to close the session. Thank you.
So, well, look, thank you very much, Anya, and all our panelist speakers, Andre, Deirdre, Bairbre, and Tom, for this very, very inspiring webinar. Thank you, really appreciate it. And I think all the members, the France Ireland Chamber of Commerce members, appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Nicola and Leah, who are the team behind this and who have helped get this webinar off the ground. We have really a lot of interest from our members for such webinars, and we will continue to produce them. And the next one that we're looking at is directors' meetings and duties with the COVID-19 challenges, which is on the 19th of November at 10 o'clock, and in partnership with LK Shields and PwC, with panel guests Derek Keogh of BNP Paribas and Dominique Kemp, who is a well-known celebrity chef. So, and then after that, we have the Ireland France Business Awards, our highlight event on the 26th of November, and myself and Nicola and Leah and Network Ireland will be doing our best to bring you a celebration virtually. So thank you all again for your support. It's been a great webinar. We have it recorded and we will make it available to FICC members. And I suppose just picking up on one thing, I would say I really would like a real tete-a-tete soon with everyone. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you. Bye-bye.